So establishing seriousness of intent online. Why is it important? Three basic reasons. Two are efficiency and effectiveness, and then the third is ethics. So efficiency and effectiveness, it seems rather obvious to say, but there's a lot of silly things on the internet. So it's very important to distinguish between people who are simply being sort of posers and dilettantes, and people who actually mean to say what they're saying, and people who might suggest some intention of actually acting on something. So from an efficiency perspective, making seriousness of intent one of your first priorities helps to weed out a lot of noise, weed out a lot of sort of unserious cases. From an efficacy point of view, it also helps to increase the overall quality of analysis, obviously. But once you've established seriousness of intent, once you've made it clear that this person is, or you've established for yourself that this person's serious about what they're doing, it actually kind of emboldens the rest of the investigation. It helps you to make a lot more efficient and precise decisions about what's actually going on. So that's really critical. But probably the most important piece that actually relates to efficiency and effectiveness is ethics. So the decision to decide that someone, based on their online profile, is a person of interest is hugely consequential. And so making sure that you're doing so efficiently and doing so very precisely ensures that you're not actually sort of sweeping someone in who's really, is doing dumb things, but may not actually be a serious concern from a security or sort of radicalization perspective. So balancing and ensuring you can kind of reinforce ethics by being efficient and effective, and I think that that's the most critical piece. So the seriousness of intent piece helps you to ensure that you're not bringing in people who are being otherwise irresponsible on the internet, but who don't really deserve your attention. So just because establishing seriousness of intent is important doesn't mean it's easy. Most things that are really important aren't that easy to do. But there are a few kind of key pointers that, in my experience training folks in the security community, can really help to make this a more effective process. The first is evidence. So usually on the internet, because it's very nicely structured most of the time, you can compile evidence in a pretty systematic way. And once you have multiple evidentiary pieces, the sum of those, or the whole of those, that evidence is greater than the sum of its parts. So they actually tend to reinforce each other, and they add up. They're multiplicative instead of additive. So, for example, in a white supremacist case, you might run into a lot of visual imagery around, sort of Nordic themes, right? A lot of people like the sort of Nordic themes, but once you start combining that with language statements around, 14 words or something like that, combined with associations with other people who might have relevance to the movement, who might have already demonstrated seriousness of intent, that reinforcement of those factors is really critical. But simply having a bunch of evidence does not in itself indicate seriousness of intent. You really have to take another step and convey empathy and use empathy as an analytical tool to put yourself in the sort of shoes of that other person. That's something that a computer is never going to be able to accomplish. So being able to develop a really clear understanding and almost like a personal appreciation of it. I've heard it said, sort of an educated subjectivity about how and why people post things and what they might actually be thinking is really critical. Now, the final factor, in addition to evidence, empathy, would be external validation. So having a second pair of eyes, a sort of sober second thought around whether or not this particular individual or this particular theme is of relevance and would be considered serious is probably the most important thing. So again, evidence, empathy, and external validation. The thing that interests me the most about the future of technology and extremism isn't so much the evolution of technology and how it advances, because it's going to advance rapidly and it's going to advance in really unpredictable ways. That's really exciting. The thing that interests me more is how those changes in technology affect human beings and affect the psychosocial factors that relate to extremism and the question of radicalization, this sort of stuff. So as technology changes, it has a huge impact on us as human beings, consumers of that technology, consumers of that media. And so I think a lot of study ought to be focused more on that question. There's already been a lot of discussion around the potential power of the internet to radicalize people and things like this, but I think we need to complicate that question a lot more and take it a lot further. Thomas Haighammer's said that we have what he calls a technology optimism bias. So we tend to think about how terrorists and extremists benefit from the internet, but we tend not to think enough about how they suffer from it. And so I think we need to think about the internet as a two-way street, not just how extremists can use the internet to radicalize other people and to convey their messaging, but also how evolutions in technology and the growth of technology and the pervasiveness of technology is actually affecting how terrorists think, how extremists and terrorists are making decisions, potentially radicalizing into extremism, but also how they even conceive of the terrorist project or the extremist project. That's really a critical question, because I think that provides a site and an opportunity for real meaningful strategic change. Much more targeted counter-messaging and counter-narratives. To date, a lot of the state-led efforts, in my opinion, have been really ham-fisted and kind of valued quantity over quality, but also the opportunity to intervene at an earlier stage with people who might be vulnerable to extremist thinking and extremist ideologies. If we can establish things like seriousness of intent, we can use the internet and the sort of future of the internet, which I think will be very interesting, to more meaningfully influence and dissuade people from pursuing that future. So in the sort of battle between the future of technology and the future of terrorism, I think the thing that's most important is to understand how that future of technology is going to influence the future of terrorism.